Hello again. I'm Dan Alasso, and I'm reading you my biography of Dr. Charles Knowlton, an infidel body snatcher, and the fruits of his philosophy. And in the last chapter, we actually discussed his publication, finally, of The Fruits of Philosophy, his birth control book, in about 1831, 1832. And this chapter, chapter 24, is called Ashfield. And this is about the town that he moves to and spends the rest of his life living in. So, I begin, as always, with a quote from Knowlton himself. Knowlton says, "The town of Ashfield, far famed for peddlers and peppermint, lies in the southerly part of Franklin County, Mass, 15 miles from Greenfield, and contains about 1,800 temperate, industrious, and for the most part enterprising inhabitants, besides a good many sheep. It also contains 4 meeting houses. Most people hereabouts have been so thoroughly bred, and I may almost say born in the belief of Christianity, have heard from the pulpit such denunciations against infidels, so-called, and are so entirely ignorant of their views and arguments, that it seems to them almost impossible for an infidel to be sound in the head and sound in the heart. To convince you that this may be is my chief object on this occasion. And now my story. While Charles had been on the road struggling to sell enough copies of modern materialism to feed his family, his older brother, Emery, had moved to Ashfield, Massachusetts, a few miles east of Hawley, where Charles and Tabitha had lived. Emery bought a farm in 1830, paying $133 for a house and barn, and $260 for 15 improved and 80 unimproved acres of land. Improved acres were cleared fields where a farmer could immediately plant crops or pasture animals. Unimproved acres in Ashfield were forest. The youngest Knowlton brother, Augustus, lived in Ashfield with Emery for a couple of years. Augustus was listed in the town's annual records, where he paid a poll tax, but no property tax. A couple of years later, Charles first appeared on Ashfield's tax rolls in the same way, as a resident, but not a property owner. Emery and his wife Polly had 3 children in Ashfield between 1828 and 1833, Leander, Augustus, and Charles. Before deciding to try his luck in Ashfield, Charles had moved his family to Ashburnham, just east of Winchendon. "I had not been there but a few weeks," Charles said, "before an Orthodox minister brought his brother-in-law into town, and having consulted the Orthodox minister of the place and a few others, it was determined that this said brother-in-law should settle in the town as a physician, and all on the strength of my unpopular opinions." But Charles had gone to the trouble of moving his family again, and had paid the town's previous physician for his practice, so he decided to stand his ground in Ashburnham. Charles posted a placard on the doors of the meeting houses announcing he would, quote, "say a few things in relation to myself next Thursday evening." The speech was well attended, and Knowlton's appeal to the common sense of the town people was successful. The doctor, quote, "with his orthodoxy, total abstinence, and rich wife, remained in town but 2 or 3 months, doing scarcely business enough to support his horse. After he left the town, the minister and myself got along very peaceably together, he attending to his business and I to mine. My principles were well known in the place," Charles said, "but the people were tolerant, and I commanded the principal part of the business within 3 or 4 miles of me, and I considered myself well established." But Ashburnham was a very small town, and Charles had a growing family to feed. Tabitha was pregnant again in 1831, for a 4th time in 6 years. Charles left his family in Ashburnham and went to Providence, Rhode Island. While trying to find a place and build a medical practice in an unfamiliar city, Charles filed a copyright application for The Fruits of Philosophy. Then he heard from his older brother that Ashfield needed a doctor. Ashfield's principal physician, Dr. Eno Smith, had begun winding down his practice around 1828 so that he could represent the town in the state legislature in Boston. Smith had two sons-in-law who were physicians, but neither of them were brilliant doctors. Emory alerted Charles to the town's need, but Charles wasn't the only person interested in being Ashfield's next doctor. Luckily for Charles, he was able to make friends with Roswell Shepherd, the other physician planning to take advantage of the opportunity in Ashfield. Knowlton and Shepherd formed a partnership in the summer of 1832. Although his new partner apparently lacked the formal medical training Knowlton had received at Hanover, Charles considered Roswell a very talented practical physician. Quote, "He came to town without money or friends," Charles said, "and success alone brought him a great run of business." Shepherd and Knowlton's practice together lasted 5 years and captured most of Ashfield's medical business. After briefly owning a half share of a property while he built up his practice, Charles bought a big house on Ashfield's Main Street. Roswell Shepherd lived on 10 acres close to town and kept a few cows, but Charles had no interest in farming. He and Tabitha decided on a 2-story wooden house with a detached barn on an 1.5-acre corner lot. The home had been built by Ashfield's first physician, Dr. Phineas Bartlett. Charles probably liked the fact that the house and office had been associated with Ashfield's leading doctor. The home was comfortable and spacious enough for a family of 6. Charles and Tabitha's 4th child, Augusta Comfort Knowlton, had been born in November 1831, while the family was staying in Winchendon. Charles and his partner Shepherd built a strong practice in Ashfield and the surrounding towns. Charles began riding out into the countryside regularly and soon had patients in 30 towns and villages. Shepherd and Knowlton's success was jealously noted by Dr. Smith's sons-in-law. Because he lacked formal education, quote, "Their chief cry against Dr. Shepherd," Charles said, "were slurs such as quack, don't know nothing, and horse doctor." Then Smith's son-in-law, Dr. Jared Bement, who was also a deacon of the local congregation, discovered Knowlton's infidelity. "Against me," Charles said, "it was no principles, bad principles. Don't believe a man has got any soul. He would as lief kill a man as a sheep. What is the difference if a man have no soul?" Dr. Bement's income decreased steadily each year after Shepherd and Knowlton arrived, in spite of his whispering campaign against his rivals. But it had little to do with the issues he complained of. Bement just wasn't a very good doctor. In the spring of 1832, for example, a 20-year-old farmer named Alanson Miles came down with a disease Dr. Bement called lung fever. As he was slowly recovering from his initial illness, Miles rode 4 miles into town to see Bement, quote, "on account of a tumor which had appeared upon his back." Without examining the back, Charles said, the doctor prescribed a blister, and the patient returned home. A few weeks later, Miles was visited by a traveling healer who lanced the tumor, or rather abscess, which discharged a large quantity of purulent matter, very much to the relief of the respiration and cough, and the entire relief of the expectoration. But the abscess didn't heal, and Miles didn't recover. 2 months after Allance's abscess was opened, Charles visited the Miles farm to treat another member of the family. The discharge, Charles said, was still very profuse and fetid, the patient very feeble. Charles gave Alanson a prescription, but since the man was someone else's patient, he thought no more about the case. Quote, But in the following December, 9 months or so from the time the abscess was opened, being in the family on a visit to another patient, a neighbor who chanced to be in said to me, as I was about to leave, "Doctor, can't you do something for Allinson? It is such a job to take care of him." Charles promised to think about Allinson's case and try to come up with a treatment. He found, quote, little in my small library to direct me in such a case, but as it was generally believed that the patient would not recover, and as his condition was truly deplorable, I resolved to do something upon my own hook, which would be likely to have decided effect. By this time, Allinson was, quote, an object to look upon. Most of the young man's hair had fallen out, and he was stooped and emaciated. Allinson's wrists, ankles, and face were swollen with fluid, and his fingers were clubbed. Allinson was having night sweats, and his abscess was still open and oozing very fetid, purulent matter. His regular physician either didn't know of the young man's ongoing distress or didn't know what to do about it. Knowlton wasn't sure what to do either, but he had promised to try. He spent the night reading and thinking and returned the next day. And I'll quote a long passage here. Placing the patient upon his knees on the floor, I succeeded in passing the slightly curved extremity of the catheter into the chest and drew off full 2/3 of a pint of fetid, purulent matter. After the larger part of this matter had passed, injections of a solution of chloride of lime were now repeated until they returned nearly clear. In less than 12 hours more, all edematous swellings were removed, and I then gave an opiate. Nothing more whatever was done for this patient. The abscess healed entirely within a week. I did not even see him again until the following April, when his appearance was so changed that I did not know him, being a stranger to me before his sickness. He worked out for full wages upon a farm the following summer, has ever since enjoyed uninterrupted good health, no shortness of breath, has a family of healthy children, and still lives in Ashfield. Nearly a year after Dr. Peppermint had diagnosed Allinson Miles with lung fever and sent him on his way, Charles spent 3 days treating the young farmer and healed him. Knowlton had no miracle cure. His drug bag was as limited as every other doctor's in 1832. But unlike Peppermint, Charles thought creatively about the tools in his bag, and he worked hard at curing his patients. People in over 24 western Massachusetts hill towns were beginning to depend on Knowlton's efforts and on the results of his work. Unable to convince their patients Knowlton was a bad doctor, Charles's rivals decided they would have to find some other way to protect their business in Ashfield. And we'll see in future chapters how they tried to do that. But in the meantime, I hope you found that a little bit interesting. Thanks very much for listening. I'll see you again very soon.